Welcome everyone to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor, Theta, our local designer, Norman Rafferty, and our good friends and GMs, RedRabbit and Lessons Learned. When it comes to tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Lessons, why don't you go next?
My pronouns are he, him. I am a budding game designer, writer with a book out on Amazon called Night and Stars. I also run streams here on Twitch. And also I have an ongoing series of Mass Effect, a Legendary Bridge Edition. First episode is out over YouTube on their Lessons Learned, and I run the Sunday game here for the wonderful people over at the Raptor channel.
All good. Rafferty, go ahead and give us your stuff.
Hello, world. I'm Norman Rafferty. He, him. I work for Sanguine Games. I'm angry at make believe, and so I've worked on a whole bunch of books that tell you how to do it. And if you're watching this in the future, look for us at First Squared Convention in Wisconsin in April.
And not last but not least, RedRabbit.
Hey everybody, RedRabbit here. I am a game master here on the Ractus channel. Highlight of my week is our Wednesday mornings when we play Ironclaw 2nd Edition. I like to play a lot of different other game systems as well. I like to consider myself a student of narrative design and of game design.
All right. So today, we all read and interpret the rules books in slightly different ways, so it's common for those interpretations to be a little bit at odds. These arguments can sometimes be shut down with a simple affirmative, that's how it's written in the book, and at first glance, it might seem like a very solid and impartial argument, but is an impartial decision one that considers the state of your players at the table, or even one that makes the game fun? The rules don't care about your feelings, but you should. So today, we'll be talking about interpretations and empathy at your table. Rafferty, why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
That clickbait title. Okay.
Clickbait. I had to.
Well,
it's too good.
I mean, it's a weird way of saying it because technically the rules are supposed to. Like as we're recording this, Dungeons and Dragons has recently realized that alignments are problematic and has started eroding all of them out of the books.
They listened to our podcast. They finally took us into consideration and they edited it. I gotta thank them for listening and for tuning in.
They were listening to us. No, they're keeping the alignments. They're just removing some of the connotations of it. But I'm always getting back to like this is what we meant by rules don't care about your feelings. It was kind of like on the one for a couple years now, people have been arguing that Dungeons and Dragons, should have racial alignments, which is alignments as a genetic condition, and there's been people opposed to that because they say isn't this racial coding? And the answer is well, yeah, it pretty much is. The problem is there's this overriding theory that I have always said is bad, which was the idea that if you don't like something, why don't you change it? And so a lot of the resistance to the idea of changing alignments in D&D was, well, if you don't like it, just don't do it. I mean, why not? If something bothers you in the book, just don't do it, right? So why was this even an issue? And the answer is this is an issue because rules endorse behavior. The book was telling people, okay, here's an idea. You can ignore it. And just hear me out. I'm just discoursing here. In other words, when the rule books have ideas in them or concepts in them, the mere act of presenting them to players as something you could do or something you should experience is throwing that in the game. And the defense of this of saying, well, if you don't like it, you can just ignore it is hollow. That's what we mean by rules don't care about your feelings. It's kind of like, no, if we did care about your feelings, we wouldn't be endorsing things that we think would make you feel bad. We would put stuff in the book that either we thought would make you feel good, or if it's something that we think is interesting as a role-playing challenge, we would present it as a role-playing challenge. And instead, you get a lot of games that just throw everything out there and go, whatever, don't like it, don't do it. and if you don't like it, yell at each other and blame each other about how bad the game is until it gets good. Also known as the Mercer effect.
Rules
So,
endorse behavior should honestly be our tagline right now, I think. What do you got to say, Listens?
Well, I think to continue this line of thought is that if you were to reverse the situation, would say that they take it out, right? And then people complain why they took it out. The people who were in favor of take it out could say, well, you don't have to play with those rules, right? You can play with them in them, right? If you want all your orcs to be irredeemable evil, so that makes it easy for you to kill them, then in your campaign world, they're irredeemable evil, so you can kill them. But then we have the discourse that says, well, but you're saying that if you take this out, then you're saying people who believe that orcs are irredeemable evil are wrong. And I get into the cycle that I think I told you this before, which is the good people, good things cycle. Where
so not only do rules endorse behavior, but a lack of rule condemns behavior. I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, but I'll go a little further because I think when people talk about discourse, there's what I call good people, good things, where people start with the, this is probably there's a better name for it, but I'm not a philosopher. I haven't studied philosophy in years. So this is what I call it, where I'm a good person. And because I'm a good person, the things I like, as they are good things. Because otherwise, I would be a bad person. Therefore, the things I like are good because I'm a good person. And
right, very backwards justification to things.
If I like a thing that says, by the way, all orcs are evil, well, that has to be good because I'm a good person. I don't like things that are bad or evil. So, and if you say it is evil, then you're saying I am evil because I like a bad thing, but that's not possible because I'm a good person. Yeah. You see?
Right. It's the sort of logic that makes the person incredibly defensive as soon as someone tries to puncture a hole in bad logic.
Exactly. I'm not the problem. The ignorant game designers are the problem. They just need to bow to my current issue with this problem, and I can go on enjoying my murder simulation, fully secure in my own ethics and morality.
Because Griffin, you're our token Requiem player, right?
That's right.
Yes. Do you remember the rules about stacks that are in Vampire the Requiem?
Oh, I remember the quote from them. I think it's from the 4th edition book. Yes, you can do so, but you'll have no joy in it. It's like...
Oh, no. Oh. It's the way it's worded. Like, this is hilarious. Remember the Requiem, they say that vampires can still enjoy copulative sex. They will still, orgasm and enjoy it on a physical level. But the curse of vampirism has removed all emotional attachment.
Damn.
Right. Now here's a fun question. So is that a hard and fast rule then? It's in the book. It says that's how it happens.
You have no emotional attachment to sex if you are a vampire in Requiem.
Does it follow that if you don't have any emotional attachment to sex as a human being, that you are then kind of a vampire?
I don't know if sadly they did not link the humanity rules to the sexuality.
They fucking well did in the 5th edition, so if you want that, it's there. I think you need a humanity of 6 or higher if you want to keep getting it on.
Yep.
Wow.
But I mean, you may notice they removed that in later editions.
They did.
And
they're in the 5th edition.
It's one of those weird comments about I understand why they had it in there because they wanted to make someone wanted to portray vampires as cold and callous and cruel, but it's also funny because it basically would just say that okay, all vampire fiction you've ever read, any of it anywhere, all bullshit. Vampires don't actually have emotional entanglements and relationship problems. The curse removed that.
Yes, let's remove the elements that produce drama.
I just got to ask you a question. Is that all vampires or is that the Lothario clan that has that ability?
It's only vampires in Vampire the Requiem first edition. If you're playing any other version of Vampire that is not that specific edition, you are allowed to have romantic feelings.
Yeah, it seems to me that seems like a very special clan power,
It's actually kind of funny because, the same system, Requiem 1E, also has touchstones, which is very specifically, you do have emotional attachments, so it already contradicts each other. So now we have the problem of, if you're playing that specific edition when it came out, how do you interpret that?
This does bring up one thing we should talk about when we say rules, don't care. almost every game system is written by multiple people.
Mm-hmm.
Especially over a large period with little to no oversight. So someone may have written this one section of the book and someone wrote a different section of the book, and they may not even talk to each other or ever met or play tested. It just comes all out in the book. And also for those of us angry indie people, a lot of us angry indie people are coming to the table with a lot of our biases. Like I've seen a lot of heartbreaker games where someone really liked the escalation rule from 13th Age, and they like the advantage disadvantage from D&D 5th edition, and they like the Palladium pluses and minuses system that are all arbitrary. So let's shove all of them into one game. There, 3 competing systems all going on at the same time. Why not? Vampire, I think, is one of the bigger examples of that, where you'll have one section that's obviously written by somebody that's very mature, and then you'll have another part of it that says, don't let your players cure AIDS. Just don't let them.
Vampire,
right? Tonal shift just in writing itself is totally a thing.
Oh, totally. There was some scandal surrounding the 5th edition of Vampire also, where they issued a book reprint because of some stuff just got too real. there were cases.
Massacre.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
So what happened was one of the vampire books had referenced vampires being involved in the Chechnya massacre, and
right.
Oh my God, this is let's get everybody to unsubscribe right now, because it was mentioned. It's okay, so remember, we're okay with vampires going around and taking people's bodily fluids on a regular basis without their permission. We're okay with that. But as soon as we start invoking real world wars, it's too real.
Which is kind of hilarious because, when you look at, say, a bunch of comic books, human beings have no agency. It's only super beings that cause these things to happen.
That's
kind of how all the RPG fiction works, too, when you think about it, too. It's only the vampires had their hand in every single thing. Humans never chose to cause these genocides. It was just them.
I do want to cap this off by saying, everyone loves the minions, right? The little yellow Twinkie people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
who mysteriously disappear.
Yes, if you go to the Minions website and describe their lore throughout history, there's a whole from 1938 to 1945, during which no one seems to know what the Minions were up to.
Huh.
Very, very much trying to dodge a very obvious bullet.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
There's a lot of... Yeah. No. It's funny where the lines emerge. You can never really predict or tell where... when the fantasy gets too real for people and where that's going to come out. And I think in some cases it's kind of random. It does expose a lot of weird social hypocrisy that we live with from our worldview, where people will, say, I'm not going to list examples, but basically people are more or less okay with certain atrocities and less so with others. And you'll find that it often comes down to how personally affected they have been and or feel that they are, senses of entitlement as well. But yeah, besides that, you really can't predict it.
Well, I think sorry, I gotta say, books, I mean, we talk about the business of making the games and everything, but also their art as well, and they exist in the real world, and art reflects reality and reality is reflected in art. And sometimes people don't like what they see, For example, in the whole Chechnya thing, I think it might see people make the argument, you're trivializing a very relatively recent event, where real people were both the committers of the atrocities and the victims of the atrocities, and putting something like fantastical aspect like vampires seems like, it's just make believe, right? It's not, doesn't matter. We can role play through, the blood and guts. But if you refer to, say, World War I, you might get an angry person at 99 years old shake a cane at you. But I think most people don't care about that, right? They're like, okay, World War I is so distant enough. Like the Vikings, we could talk about the Vikings all day. The Vikings really were known as Vikings because that's what they were pillaging and raping. But 1,000 years ago, that's just history now. So
and right, and well, it's reductive. I mean, me, I'm always angry about the reductiveness. I've been complaining with the relative modern thing in games of where enemies always fight to the death. I'm always pointing at Naughty Dog's Last of Us, where the game designers take gleeful like they mentioned this in the press releases. Look at the agonizing pain these 50 people are in after you gut shot them.
Mhm.
By the way, go ahead and gut shoot them because they'll come at you suicidally out in the open, so you can gut shoot them for your own pleasure. And this rolls over into the role-playing games I've been complaining about, where in the last 20 years or so, I've seen a lot of the adventures, the tabletop adventures, which are written to run on human brains, not computers, human brains, are written in such a way that bad guys are always suicidal and fight to the death. And after you killed them, you find notes on their bodies that tell you where the next plot point is. And that's always presented to you like you go and murder all of these people and get all of their stuff. There's exceptions to this. I think, some of you have pointed out some of them. But I'm looking at stuff like Tyrant Queen and Dragon Heist and that Candlekeep thing and a couple of the stuff I've seen on D&D Beyond. That's creeping into it. And it's this weird idea of... like Lesson said, we're the good guys. We're labeled good right here on our sheet, or even if we're evil, we're good because we're not that. We're an evil, but a different kind. We're not the rapist and ethnic cleansing kind of evil. We're a different kind of evil. Sure, that stuff's evil, but moving on. It's supposed to be a fantasy and supposed to be empowering about that kind of thing. But we're kind of getting away from like what I was kind of complaining about. Man.
We got a little bit distant.
Well, it's also a question of like people will say, well, adventures aren't rules, which is weird because it's kind of like, sure, we've got rules for buying and selling and trading and negotiating and that kind of stuff. But the actual things that actually happen, the actual story, that's not rules. Story and rules are separate. But what we kind of mean about this is, crap. It's like, the books are encouraging us to murder things, or a lot of there's a lot of jocularity of, man, I guess we got off track because I could complain about that, but what I really wanted to complain about was when rules make things happen. Like we should get back to the session 0 thing you guys talked about, because I remember I was kind of against session 0, and the major reason why I was against that is because I don't believe that the session 0s are often very good at establishing the ground rules of how we will conduct ourselves. Like a session 0 might be where you say, okay, no evil PCs, or this is going to be a game where you are going to establish, colonize this land in terms of the king. So you're going to go in these places, and set the ground rules of we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, we're not going to do this, and establish that. I mean, I believe those are good things to do. But I'm often complaining that the role-playing game itself, if you read the text of most role-playing games, they don't talk to you about your responsibility as a player is to not make anyone else feel bad. Like, I don't think that's actually mentioned in any role-playing game. Maybe it is. Just one I haven't seen, but I haven't seen that in a game where it says, don't make other players feel bad.
Right. Usually the tagline is like, you are here to play this game and have fun. Make sure that they have fun. But usually it's not put forward that way that you have a responsibility to do so.
You have a bias there. You're saying it's the game master's job to make sure everyone's fun. I'm talking about, where does it say that as a player, don't be a dick and hurt other people's feelings? Where does it say that?
Right, exactly.
I think we're getting close to it, but in the negative space of having things like X card and stuff like that, right? That you say, okay, we're going to put in these tools that should lessen or even prevent somebody from going too far. But that's a negative space. That's what happens when somebody goes too far. Okay, we have this.
Right.
With the implication that people shouldn't, that this is the last resort, right? Where in fact, it should be, by the way, as Rafferty is saying, it's your responsibility to, have this conversation and everybody. And like I mentioned in earlier episodes, that part of the outline structure of the game is how, the social interactions set out the outer limits of what is and isn't acceptable, right?
Right. I think that's I think that's what's happening here. There's a lot of implicit statements. There's a lot of things written with the expectation of it, but the thesis statement is not there. That you are here to make sure that everyone at the table has fun, including you.
Right. I mean, stepping over vampire, which tells you to play someone who sucks vital fluids out of people's bodies without their consent. And has mind control. But you go over here to like, the D&D thing, and like the text of the book will say, hey, if you want to be a halfling but pretend to be a badger, go right ahead. Define any appearance and gender and stuff you want. By the way, you can also play a chaotic evil warlock who gains tangible benefits from murdering people in your dark master's name.
Yeah.
And no, like I don't see any warnings there. And by the way, have fun. And there's like no like notes on this. I mean, they have kind of notes on playing chaotic evil is the most dangerous alignment you can play. But it's this weird thing of where, they redacted on it from D&D 4, which said we're going to remove evil as a player option. They put it back in D&D 5 with no warnings. If I show up and say, hey, I'm doing evil stuff, I wrote evil on my sheet. The book said I could do this. Then it's like, and then that builds about really like, where did that idea come from? Would I have written evil on my sheet if the book didn't put that idea in my head?
But that also comes back, you touch on it, of people complaining, because I bet you that a lot of people would complain if I say opening my opening a paragraph said, by the way, this is a game to have fun, and that means that you should respect other people's boundaries and not be an awful person. I bet you that there will be very hot corners of the gaming internet who go like, oh, this game is for kids, and you shouldn't have to say that, because in my game is hardcore. And I like to
This
do
game is telling me not to be mean. It's too woke for me.
Yeah, I don't have to conjecture. That did happen.
It does happen.
It will happen.
And that's why I've been like taking D&D 5 to task for it for being weak sauce, because they put the idea of you could be evil in the book, and they're just removing its racial attachment while still letting players take it. So the game's not racially coded, but feel free to play an asshole.
No, totally. I think that's the thing. I've said it before, but I think Wizards of the Coast holds the copyright on imagination. And basically, so long as you're playing D&D, they could not care less what it is that you want to do with the system or the game. As long as you're doing it with D&D, it's okay. So when you say weak sauce, I feel it.
Yeah, I mean, well, to roll that back, they wouldn't have eroded out racial coding alignments if they didn't care. It's like suddenly the discourse has happened.
I mean, they only care because the player base cared. Like, these are not new. The, people wanting to play, the good goblin has been around since Tolkien invented Gollum. Like, these are not new ideas, but right now in this current social sphere that we live in, this is a very important issue that people are finding issue with in D&D. I, fall on sides of that argument that are weird. I feel like I'm on my own side on that one. But typically, like, people have decided that this is important to them, and it's important to Wizards of the Coast insofar as they are loving that everyone loves their game. And even if they're not really playing the game that they wrote, they're still paying for that game. And as long as they'll keep doing that, Wizards will keep making weird concessions. I think it was funny because you said, you pointed out that, like, Wizards of the Coast says, oh, use the rules you want, ignore the ones that you don't. When you look at a lot of indie games, every single indie game introduces you to the game by saying, this is what this game is. This is what we expect you to do. You are dungeon, you're thieves stealing from a dungeon, or you're pacifists, heading back from a war, trying to, find your way home.
You're four dudes on a spaceship looking for a bounty. Yeah.
Right, D&D is the only game, and I guess, I don't know, maybe Pathfinder.
Well, no, I want to take this back. D&D does say that you're going to be a brave adventurer in a world. I'm talking about, like, this came up in the loader mulch discussion that we had earlier. Okay, so every game almost every game assumes you're going to be in a party. Like, there's going to be 2, 3, or 4 people at the table, right? And in the loader mulch thing, I came up with the issue of, where does it say you're supposed to be a team player? Like, if you're in a party, then you should build a character who would be in a party, right? Because I've had people fight me on this, saying, well, no, I'll just build whatever arrogant asshole I like. And, it's like, in terms of good storytelling, we would, like, if we were watching a movie or a story and ask, why do they put up with this asshole? We'd hate the story. And if you're talking about a realistic world, unless people were shackled or forced or, have no choice whatsoever, or if it's fucking classic D&D, were hired on a job to go do this, they would leave. They would wander off because they hate these people and they can do anything they want.
I think there's even like a lower level than that too.
I have an idea, because this goes back to Session Zero as well. and some games are including session 0 as part of their session 0.5, what do you want to call it, session 1 extra. Maybe add the idea of buying, and not simply buy into, as in buying into the game itself, but also buying into everybody's role on the table, right? Because session 0 will be like, oh, this is where we present our ideas, and many session 0s are also when people make their characters together. So if you have a session 0 where they're constructing their characters together and they can talk to each other, and the rules encourage people to talk to each other, say, okay, and have a series of questions. Okay, you created this character. How do you see this character interacting with, say, with 2 other characters, right? Who's a character that they're going to annoy, and which is a character that they're going to be buddy with? That make
Right.
and
there
tell
are-
them and tell them that they tell them that this will change over the course of the game. This is not static. Make it clear. Because sometimes it changes, and you start playing the characters like, no, that's not going to work. But have that in it, and I think Rafferty's mentioned that there are some games to do this, and so that, I think, solidifies these social rules, because now somebody who's sitting in there going like, oh, okay, these are the restraints that my group is willing to work with, and this gives me an idea of what they're willing to tolerate and how far I can push one thing or another. Of course, there's always the risk, and there's something designers don't want to, is somebody go like, yeah, I don't want to play this game. Well, I cannot be that guy that I want to be.
Well,
yeah, that's the choice.
There's also, like I said, hidden things. Like, I'm fond of saying there are no bad games. There's just games that have trouble getting the players to show up. Because most people, if they have a bad experience, will just stop showing up. And, you know, they won't say anything. And if pressed, they'll probably say things like, well, it wasn't for me, or I was kind of bored, or I couldn't really make it. Whereas, you know, but we're like I was going to mention, Powered by the Apocalypse game. So the first one, Apocalypse World, you'd aggressively track your relationships with other characters. And many of the derivatives of that had you doing that. But there's also like weird stuff in that book. Like, I can never get over Apocalypse World 2nd Edition's example of play, which has one player shouting at another player saying, because my character has had sex with your character, you have to do what I say. And then rapidly makes 3 die rolls before waiting for any response from the other player, you know, and, you know, to say, okay, now you have to do what I said. And it's like, on the one hand,
built-in toxicity right there.
On the one hand, I could see some groups rolling with this, but on the other hand, I'm just looking at this of, you know, like, on the surface, this was, you just shouted a bunch of rules at somebody, and there's no indication of how much time passed. So it looks to me like you shouted 3 rules at someone and then said, haha, you have to do what I say now, even though your character doesn't want to, because you are compelled to do so against, you know, without consent. And that's kind of what I meant when I originally said about rules, you know, being kind of cruel, because some groups might be okay with this, but there's nothing in the rule that actually says that. And I could see, like, in mixed groups, because earlier in a different stream, Red brought up one of the strengths behind the game was supposed to be that random people could show up. Like, I agree that the theory behind role-playing game is that if I show up with, you know, a brew job with high humanity and social ties, the book already defined what all of those things are, so I can just show you the character and you can nod and say, okay, you can play. The idea that I use the rules and so random people can jump in without a lot of setup. But then you have the opposite problem of, by the way, you also have to have shitloads of unwritten setup, because apparently the game is a minefield where we could easily do things that steamroller or make people uncomfortable. But that's kind of in a nebulous range of the X card range of that is a weird thing that we're not even going to talk about happens at role-playing games. Or if it does happen, blame your GM. Bad Dad was in charge of everything. And that's why I'm saying, like, we should be talking about the game as, if we're going to get rid of the Mercer effect, I mean, if freaking Wizards of the Coast is going to sponsor Critical Role, okay, and pay those people to play the game in front of people and tell them this is how it should be played, then we should ask, what makes these games great? And one thing that makes it great is that everyone is working together.
There was a game that I found recently, like 2 days ago, because we've been talking a lot, and I realized that through all the conversations where we have bashed Dungeons and Dragons, we have implied that there are other games out there that people could be playing. And Raf, you yourself have mentioned multiple times that we should be designing games to elicit the kind of gameplay that people want watching actual plays like that. And I think I found it. I think I found the game that feels like someone sat down, watched an actual play game, and then tried to reverse engineer a game system out of it. It's hilariously called Quest, and it has the most generic website. It's literally www.adventure.game. So I urge everyone to check it out. And the reason I wanted to mention it is because I haven't run it yet. I bought a copy, but I haven't run it. I flipped through it. About half of that book is rules about how to make everyone at the table feel included and how to prevent awkward social faux pas. So earlier, what you said, Raf, about how the book does not put any kind of responsibility or onus on the players. A lot of these rule sets are, there's not a lot of energy wasted on, how should people comport themselves at a table in a social game? That is a large component of this, which feels like a very stripped down D&D, specifically for the kind of performative play style that they do on Critical Role.
I definitely should check this out, because that sounds like a responsible way. I think I've seen games that like kind of want to be kind of feel good type games. Like I know there's some made role playing games, and I think we already mentioned Homeward, which is a game where you can't be violent. But in many ways, I know some people were complaining about like every indie game is about you're all grains of rice in a cereal bowl. How does this make you feel?
Yeah,
and I'm not saying those are invalid experiences, but also like this, I think there's room for storytelling of where things get extreme, like the vampire people rolling back the Chechnya massacre references were because a large number of the audience thought that was too real. But on the other hand, vampires supposed to be real. It's sold on the idea of this is the real world. You're yourself, but you're cool. And the idea that, it doesn't shy away from the brutality and darkness, of like
human darkness is a very important theme to that game.
Right. You were fine with, all the blood siphoning, all that kind of stuff until, it got real. It was, some people might really be, compelled with that or see that, but some other people might not. And the idea that what goes on at your table, so this is the dark side of performative. Because I've done role playing that I would not do in public. Pause for everybody to look at me like a pervert. But it's also like I've had people at my table who make off-color jokes that I know, like, okay, that stays here. Or inside jokes that I don't expect to be funny to other people, so it wouldn't be good performatively. And things that I know people would do because it's a private setting with people that they trust. So they're willing to express themselves in ways with a small group of people they trust, more so than they would with the entire world. Which I think is another issue. The Mercer effect that I think we're worried about. When everyone is looking at games as being something that we show to everyone in the world, that means we have to water the games down. Because I know there's some discourse saying, well, shouldn't the concepts of good and evil be things that we debate? And the thing I'm always complaining about is we're actually shutting down the debate. Where the games are written in such a bland way that they assume that whatever you guys want to do is okay, and the game master will keep all of you in line if it's not. And
I think the problem is it tries to hide the blandness, because every time you cannot escape, and this is more of an issue I have with video games that try to do this as well, like trying to be apolitical. But the problem is they say it's apolitical because they're taking very common and widely accepted positions and saying this is the standard. And therefore, because people are blind to the fact that this is the quote unquote standard, they don't see it. Which is back to the whole idea of the orcs, right?
Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there. It's not political. By the way, the armies of the Tyrant Queen have shown up, so you must choose to ally yourself with either the Tyrant Queen or the people of the realms. But no politics.
Yeah. Right, and this is like the statement where all art is political comes from, because all things are built with the assumptions built in with them from the societies or people around them. nothing is like a complete blank slate, and if it were, you would quickly project things that you believe onto it. That's why blank slate characters exist. They're you.
Well,
That's
right.
that's the thing though, because apolitical is only ever a publisher or a business line. It's like a buzzword. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is that we want you to buy our product and not be offended. And we think that we have fallen in line with enough of your own common internally held beliefs that you won't see anything controversial in this product, which is exactly where WotC is headed.
I would love to bring up the Fall of Fallujah video game, where their initial press release was, "We're not going to be political," and I'm just like,
getting away from the politics. It's like the other like mixed messages that I've constantly been talking about, the softening of games. Like, back then we didn't call them roguelike permadeath games; we called them games. And it's like the weird thing about like Dungeons and Dragons, especially, is D&D wants to fucking kill you. If you're a bunch of first level characters, one of you could get killed. You could easily show the game with 6 hit points, and there are monsters that can one shot you at that level. Not to mention, you could just die because 6 kobolds showed up. But there's this weird thing going on of where, okay, we told you the character's an avatar of you, but if we permanently killed them, you'd feel sad. This was my avatar, and now they're dead. You killed me?
Yeah, and you're expected to not come up with another avatar of you. You're expected to come up with something that is no longer you. You are now forced into a play experience doing a thing you don't want to.
What happens is we blame bad dad again. We blame the game master. We say, well, a good GM will find a way to just resurrect you. Despite the fact that, once again, when I said rules don't care about your feelings, the rules of D&D make it almost impossible to res a first-level character. Because even if it's like, what, 50,000 gold? Where did you get 50,000 gold? You're a first-level character who gives a shit about you.
But that's because in almost every story from multiple games across the D&D-verse, everyone describes an encounter with some literal angel of mercy that comes down and says, "Your time has not come yet, sweet child." And then they get a free res because their DM doesn't want the guilt of having killed someone's character.
Well, welcome to World of Warcraft, where you're the chosen one, as well as these 5 million other people.
Gosh, I've killed like 4 characters in the last 2 weeks. I don't care. I'm killing you all.
Right, but
Air 5.
It's such a weird thing of where, like, me, I've been complaining about, I don't understand murder mysteries in D&D. Well, they killed the guy. We'll just raise him from the dead and ask him who killed him. It's like, well, no, raising the dead doesn't work on NPCs. It only works on you. In other words, like you get this weird thing of where, we're doing the game. The game is designed to kill you, but then we had to like nerf killing to where it doesn't actually make any sense. But then we had to make spheres of annihilation to throw your soul gems into, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It's a completely unfocused design, right? What is the goal of playing these combats out?
It's not Game of Thrones anymore. It's not even Sword Art Online anymore. It's not like these other things. Like when people talk about the stories they like those are supposed to be the threat of permanent death, but that actually doesn't happen on the tabletop. And the thing I'm getting at here is the rules want to kill your character. Bad dad has to bring you back to life.
Yes.
And it's like, well, if that's not the way we're actually, like Red said, if that's not the way we're actually playing the game, why isn't it written like that?
I mean, and the worst part, don't mind my complaining cats, please. The worst part, as I say, is that as someone who looks at the game from a mechanical perspective, and I'll be accused of being called a party killer at this point, but I look at it and I say, okay, well, so wait, if death is not a consequence that we can engage with, then why are we wasting all of this time on 2-hour-long fight scenes that ultimately have no, and then it goes into deeper problems of like, and then we'll take an 8-hour rest and get all of our resources back. So all of these combats have one actual fail state, which is the death of a player. And if we're taking that off if we're taking that off of the table, then what are we doing? Like, what is all of this?
You beat me to it. What's the point of playing these games? Are they games if there is no failure state within them?
Yeah. And to be honest,
are we being honest if there is a chance to fail?
This came up during the Vital Hearts design, which we are finishing. Vital Hearts is a role-playing game that my company's making that's based off of MMOs. And the first thing you'll notice that when you watch an isekai MMO show is the first thing they say is, and now if you die in the MMO, you die for real. Suddenly there's permadeath. So it's it might as well not be an MMO anymore. Because people are, if you're not saying, okay, I'll kill myself because it's the fastest way to get back to town, you're not playing an MMO.
So true.
But
Haven't nailed that one yet, have they? The whole isekai genre has failed to capture that experience.
I'm sure Theta is going to list one. There are exceptions to it, but I'm pointing that out that like Sword Art Online and many of the other imitators immediately take that off the table. But more importantly, it's like, okay, so we're writing a tabletop role-playing game that's full of combat, but specifically, if it's MMO themed, specifically killing you in the MMO is not an option if it's still an MMO. You will not be permanently dead. We have to write the game and its story, and most importantly, the way the threats are staged. Like you said, what's the point of having a 2-hour fight like regular story, like role-playing games are written in linear time. So if we, go here and go here and go here, we can't rewind to an older save. Like Dungeons and Dragons isn't written that way, that you just retcon to an earlier save after you were all killed and just do all of it all over again. In fact, you don't do the same fight twice in D. So you're right. It's kind of like, it's supposed to be written that everything linearly goes forward. But if we're not going to kill you, what are we going to do? And the answer is there are other things you can do. I think, did we do a podcast on that yet?
On specifically other consequences than death, I'm not sure. I think we did things other than combat, but not death.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd be happy because, there are ways to do it. Like people say, I don't understand. It's like, dude, like Star Trek's been on the air for years. They wrote dozens of Superman stories. It's not that hard. Like fucking Archer was 8 seasons?
Mm-hmm.
There are ways to write fantasy stories where you don't kill, there are still stakes of what's going on and threats of loss. To get back to tabletop gaming, Blades in the Dark is particularly good at it with its idea of clocks, where the idea that, things are going on. Other games started it, but that's one of them where while, the other gangs are taking over certain parts of the neighborhood or doing things you don't like, and the better Cthulhu or Warhammer adventures have dark cultists who, if they're not stopped, will destroy part of the world. Like the Enemy Within campaign is one of my favorites. And Enemy Within doesn't, spoilers, destroy the world, but it destroys a huge part of it. And you can run away from that and still survive, but there are stakes. Innocent people get killed. But the game is worded in such a way that if you succeed, hooray, you saved everyone. And if it fails, well, the world's shittier now, but you're still alive. And that's why I'm complaining about like a lot of this stuff. Because when the Tyrant Queen adventure shows up, Tyrant Queen assumes you not only ally with the good guys, but you survive all the way to the end.
Yeah, the big thing is that I don't have a problem with a game where death is not on the table. My issue is that D&D presents death as a realistic consequence of what you're doing as characters in this world from the very beginning to the very end. And yet, most people find the idea of character death abhorrent. But there's plenty of games that I've played, and there's plenty of things you can do with narratively structured games where violence is not even a part of the equation at all, and still dramatic things can happen.
As I will always argue, D&D is a game. If I showed up with, we just did the fighter thing. If I showed up with a fighter and you're telling me we're not doing any violence today, you might as well have told me to go home.
Right, yeah. So that's the thing. But you know what I think it is? Ultimately, and it's because D&D puts so much emphasis on the, I should figure out this word, authorial power of creating a character, that losing that character to death is probably the only time that the game is punitive, where you lose something that you fundamentally can't get back within the rules of the game itself, right? See, that's a step too far.
Here's the funny trick, because you've played 5 but not 4. See, yes. What 1, 2, and 3 did was 1, 2, and 3 started you with 6 to 12 hit points, and weapons can do 12 points of damage or more.
Yeah.
With 4th edition, the weapons were still doing 6 to 12 points of damage, but they started you with 30 to 40 hit points.
Mm-hmm.
With several self heals, not to mention the magical heals.
I do recall the second wind thing, right?
Well, not only is there a second wind, but also there's a big difference between starting D&D 5 with 6 hit points and starting D&D 4 with 28. Like even the
Yeah, you had
Right.
double die at the beginning of your first
right. I mean, you could
And-
still die, but you're right. So D&D 5 comes out. This is what I mean by rules don't care about your feelings. D&D 5 comes out and goes, well, obviously you hated D&D 4, so okay, back to one-hit kills. You know, we'll start you with shitty hit points. And by the way, we're going to keep the escalated damage from D&D 4 because you didn't used to be able to add your dex to damage. So kobolds used to be doing 1d4 minus 1. Now they're doing 1d4 plus 3.
Yup.
Um,
And the funny thing is, like, we keep mentioning, like, we should write these things in the way that people play them. And what I definitely remember is towards the end of 3.5, the way people were playing it is, by the way, toughness as a feat gives you an extra 10 hit points. Everyone, go ahead and take the toughness feat for free.
yeah,
There you go.
Literally,
right.
we're writing in this very rule because they recognized the problem, solved it, and then added it in, and then they took it out again.
Right, and you know me, I'm always complaining about how like you if you watch with a fine tooth comb, you can see the way a lot of like I'm complaining about Critical Role and the rest of them because they're paid by the people who make the games, so they are sponsored events, and the way that some of these things like Dimension 20 like hand wave over character death, is implying that that's the way a game should be run. That the GM is supposed to bring you all back from the dead if you actually die. Once again, my issue here with the rules are written that you're playing a deadly game, but your GM will just say, "I'll just bring you back from the dead because it doesn't really matter." And like I'm siding with Red here of like where I would be confused if I showed up at the game because I expected to be deadly to suddenly be informed, "Wait a minute, I can't actually die."
Yeah.
Now I'm in this. Then you get into this weird kayfabe thing of you can now you can only die if you if you do something suicidal and mention to the GM that you're doing this because you don't think you can die because now
Totally.
Or we have a Fallout 3 moment. No, you have to go into the chamber and do this yourself, even though I'm immune to radiation. I wouldn't want to rob you of your death.
That is beautiful.
Mhm.
No, I do like that. But I do think the other thing that you come across, in addition to the Angel of Mercy scenario, I have talked to multiple people from multiple games who have mentioned things like, oh yeah, I was sick of this character. I wanted them dead. I wanted to go out in a blaze of glory, and I literally had to like fight with the game master at the table because he kept trying to give me outs and give me resurrections and give me like plot armor, and it became a case where like the DM actually was so opposed to player death that they would not let it happen.
I would take that and
Amazing.
raise you one more, where not having death, and I mentioned this before in another podcast, not having the sweet release of death meant that you were at the mercy of the GM, and they could torture you in multiple ways.
Right, I
like,
remember your horror story.
Yeah, and
Sometimes dead is better.
Well,
Yeah,
and this is what we're getting into in the paradox. Like when I keep saying our battle cry of the rules should be written the way you're actually playing it. If we don't think, if the game can't be written with rules that imply it's a roguelike permadeath risk, but then a bunch of GMs are hand-waving over it, even if that's not the way they intend the game to be played, they should at least freaking discuss it, because this is so prevalent that this won't happen, that a GM will like find an excuse to fail forward and not have a total TPK. If we're not supposed to have a total, like, I'm fond of quoting the Stormbringer role-playing game, which is an incredibly deadly game that has a side paragraph of saying how not to die. That's where we get the joke of have a believable ransom. So that way, when people are about to kill you, you can say, wait, if you take me prisoner, people will pay to have me released. I've never seen any other role-playing game that says that. Whereas, like I said, like at least it's got that in there of that way we can have that joke. And that's the kind of game Stormbringer is, the kind of game where you could surrender and have it be honored, as opposed to what we see in, the prevalent gaming of everyone's a suicide monster who wants to kill you, but we won't actually let them. But God won't let them.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are getting close to the end here. So, what do we want to wrap up on? Lessons, what are your kind of thoughts at this point?
I guess the lesson here is that games should care about your feelings, but there's a lot of feelings out there. we reach into another rule of general gaming. This gaming is for everyone, but this game might not be for you. And as a designer, I think it would be up to me to make that absolutely clear. Like, and you know, you're gonna risk the loss of player, but I better off saying this is the game that we're playing. These are the tools that I'm giving you. This goes. I think we're gonna have to make a put on this and all the unwritten rules that we keep talking about, but we never actually talk about those rules as a set. You know, all we have to. I get a feeling that we should. And there's a massive update that needs to be done to role playing to include all the rules that have been implied for 30, 40 years and never being spelled out. And one of them is that rule, right? Rule number one, yes, the rules care about your feeling. Rule number two, gaming is for everybody, but this game might not be for you. Rule number three would be, yes, I am making, as a designers, we are making these moral, ethical, political stakes. You should know that about it from the get-go.
What are you thinking, Red? What do you got to follow that up with?
I'm feeling what Lessons is saying, because I think I agree, right? That people, there's not every game is going to be for every person. I think a lot of people are attracted to a style of RPG today that is not really being served by D&D, although D&D is the game that everyone is playing. So in that spirit, I will once again plug this game Quest. www.adventure.game. Have not run it. From what I have read, it feels like almost like the first step RPG, and I think for a lot of people, it's probably all of the rules they would ever need to run decades of tabletop gaming, and it would serve them very well. So I wish these guys the best of luck. I hope that they become a little more ubiquitous in the gaming space.
Yeah, I think, like, quick note there, maybe there should be a better introductory game than Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, we could go on about that. What about you, Ref?
Well, I mean, I want to be more positive about this, I agree with Lessons. Of course, the games should care about feelings, and like I really want to. Red brought this up earlier, and this is something I want to abolish: the idea that the theory behind the role-playing game is you don't know how to play make-believe. You have to have a book tell you. And the theory was we have this book tell us how to play make-believe so I can play make-believe with a bunch of other people. The entire purpose of the written role-playing game is so a bunch of people can get together having read this book and have a good experience together. And so really what the games have to do is spend more time discussing what makes for a good experience. Every time, like also what Red said was, the whole issue I'm having here is it's being presented to people. This is the time that you're going to have. But then if you played the rules as written, they would fight you on it. You're supposed to somehow know which rules to break and which ones not. So the games either have to, like if you want to be more in Lessons camp, the rules have to discuss why they do this. Like the big thing that's always driving me nuts is about, some of these games is the threat of permadeath has to be spelled out and made clear to everyone at the table, or they don't know it's there. Because, I mean, once again, I'm insulted. Upset that I have to put perma in front of death. We have to get everyone on the same table, and the book should be finding ways to get us all to work together. I think when someone shows up with a random character they've made, oh my god, I can't get out the blood-sucking artificer. It's just hilarious. There should be a way that when someone comes with a character, they should explain why they're going to play this character and what they hope to get out of it and why it's going to be fun, and spend more time doing that than what we actually see in the games, which are you make a character in a vacuum all by itself and then show up at a table and expect everyone to get along with you, or get moderated by someone who's assumed to have the best social skills whatsoever. Instead, I think the games of the future should be explaining more of, and like I said, the other problem is just don't have relationship scores or something like that, because that's still bad. The games need to talk about how we can get along together and tell a story better together. That's what we need.
Yeah, I think if I were to go ahead and have a last word on all this, it's definitely that everyone is there at the table to play a game, to have fun. And if your decisions aren't really working around figure out what's the most fun, what are you doing, man? What are you doing with your time? But for now, that's going to be it for today. For notes for the Aleph, we stream episodes bi-weekly at Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern. You can come join us live at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly episodes of Tabletop Gaming at the same channel, and you can join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norman Rafferty here is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com and join us on Reddit and Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Coral's Ironclaw expansion. Don't forget to check out RedRabbit and Book of Firm Game over on startplaying.games as RedRabbit. And don't forget to check out Lessons Learned at Lessons Learned 1 on Twitch and YouTube, and check out all of his series. And don't forget to check out his books over on Amazon as well. And of course, for us here, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and come see us all again. Until next time, everybody.